You've entered Bookstorm with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. And we're off again, Bookstorm followers all across the world. We've tagged you now in 35 countries, over 400 cities, and we're thrilled that you're joining us today because we're listening to what you're writing into us. And yes, we've heard you, and we are very excited to have the amazing Scott Turow with us today. Let me tell you a little bit about him, maybe some things that you don't even know. He's the author of many best-selling works of fiction: The Last Trial, Testimony, Identical, Innocent, Presumed Innocent, Burden of Proof. But did you know that he has two nonfiction books? One, called 1L, is about his experience as a law student. Scott's books have been translated into more than 40 languages. He has sold more than 30 million copies worldwide. And as if this isn't enough, Scott frequently contributes to essays and op-ed pieces in the New York Times, Washington Post, Vanity Fair, The New Yorker, and The Atlantic. Now, I am a huge fan of the blockbuster films that we all know, Presumed Innocent and Burden of Proof, which really is a part of my history, these films and these books, shaped who we all are today. Scott Turow, here's a little side note, born in Chicago, graduated high honors from Amherst, received a fellowship to Stanford University Creative Writing, then entered Harvard Law School, graduating with honors. He worked as an attorney in Chicago, lead prosecution in several high-visibility federal trials investigating corruption. And I know this is why we love his novels so much, because they're based on real-life experiences. They're authentic. They show us something of humankind, but they also teach us something. Now, let me just add one more thing they may not know. In 1990, he was featured on the cover of Time magazine. They described him as the bard of the litigious age. And wow, we couldn't agree more. He was the president of the Authors Guild. He has worked all these many years while writing. And Scott, are you still working at Denton, the global law firm?
No, I retired in August of 2020. I have two remaining pro bono obligations, which are now independent of my law firm existence. So I still practice a little bit of law, and it still manages to consume time. So, but I obviously am spending a lot less time as a lawyer than I once did.
Well, I think your retirement sounds like it's very well deserved, but we personally here at Bookstorm are just happy that you're still writing. Please don't ever retire from that.
No intention.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks so much for coming.
I'm very grateful to be talking to both of you.
Wonderful. Well, we're so happy. Scott, first of all, for our listeners, I read your book, 1L, 2 weeks before I started law school, and it was eye-opening. I mean, I was a little scared after reading it, but it was a thrilling read. I actually stayed up, I think, for 2 nights reading that book. It was amazing. Wow. Really shaped my legal education in many ways, and now as a teacher at UB Law School, it's something that my students are still talking about, so I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I sometimes say to people who say I read 1L and it terrified me, and I look at them and say, well, if you went anyway, it's your own fault then.
That's right. Oh, that's so true. Well, we're here today to talk about Suspect, your newest novel. It is phenomenal. And if you will allow me, I'd like to give just a brief description of the
Sure,
book
please.
without any spoilers, which is kind of hard with this one.
All right,
But
well, thank you. Thank you,
and you
Kristen.
and you can jump in at the end if there's anything you want to
Okay.
add. But Suspect features Pinky Granum. She is the granddaughter of one of your beloved characters, Sandy Stern, and many people are familiar with that character from your prior books. And in the past, she hasn't made the best choices. In fact, she dropped out of the police academy, but now she has a respectable enough job as a licensed PI, and she's working for an attorney on his mostly minor cases. But a new case has come along that could really catapult them both into the legal big leagues. Lucia Gomez is a local police chief, and she knows that any woman in law enforcement has to walk a fine line between authority and camaraderie to gain respect. Lucia has maintained a spotless reputation in her work until now. 3 male police officers have accused her of soliciting sex in exchange for promotions. She thinks it's a smear campaign, maybe orchestrated by some of her enemies, inside, maybe even outside the force. But she turns to Rick, the attorney, and Pinky to represent her in a federal grand jury investigation. Now, Pinky dives right in. She's got an incredible style. She is a fantastically drawn character, but she confronts the criminal underbelly of her town and some of the darkest parts of human nature. Would you like to add anything in terms of
No, that's
background?
terrific. That's terrific. I
All right.
suppose we could only add that Pinky also has, as a sidelight, an untoward fascination with her next door neighbor in the apartment building in which she lives, who, as Rick says, is a guy who quite apparently wants to be left alone, and Pinky is unable to do that. So, but that as I say, is subsidiary to her concern about defending Chief Gomez.
Perfect. Well, Scott, if you're ready, Chris, to brave the storm, we'll let Chris kick us off.
We are so ready. And listeners, I just have to say, I loved this mysterious thrill ride that really took me into another world I did not know existed. I wanted Pinky to be my best friend. I loved everything about her. I got to give a shout out because I actually have a cousin named Pinky. And if I don't bring this up now, I'll be in a lot of trouble. But I learned a lot from your character. So first of all, here's what I want to talk about. Let's talk about sex.
Okay.
It's a huge theme in this book, and with that one sentence, they're lining up at the bookstores right now as we speak.
Well done. Thank you, Chris.
You showed the reader that sex has a lot of purposes, layers, uses, not just for love, connection, need, and honesty and vulnerability, but it's also used for self-gratification. How about manipulation, power, and even crime? Pinky thought of sex in this way. When I'm in bed, I stop being baffled by other people. The other person is not just putting up with me or being polite. They really are happy to be with me. And that makes me happy too. What a gut-wrenching, honest statement that she gave us there. But in your story, sex was used and manipulated for almost every imaginable reason. I could not help but ask you, as the writer, what were you trying to show us about the beauty of sex, but also the dark world of it and its imperative importance in society?
Yeah. Now, this is, despite the sort of sensationalism that gets attached to sex, I think it's a really great question about this book, and you know, very acute. The relationship between sex and power has been a theme in my books going back to Presumed Innocent. And some of that, of course, stems from the power that sex, witness your remark about lining up at the bookstores, that sex and sexual interest has over all of us. And, you know, there are moments in Suspect of tender, intimate connection. Pinky is not somebody who shies away from sex as entertainment. And, you know, that appears to be going on in her life, although she doesn't spend as much time talking about it. And then, there's the more malign side of sex, where the need and the interest gets manipulated as an aspect of power. And, that very blurry line between all of these different aspects of sex and sexuality is very much at the heart of the novel. And you're completely right to point it out.
And you really have tapped into something. I thought a lot about this as the reader, all of the different ways that sex can be used and misused. But I think in a brilliant sort of way, you tapped into the one thing that drives a lot of our choices and decisions in life. And maybe we don't even realize it, but this one thing motivates us and causes us to make all sorts of choices and choose different directions more than maybe we even realize, maybe even on a subconscious way. And as a reader, as I unraveled all these characters and the way that they used and misused sex, it sort of was astounding to me.
Yeah. Well, I find the comment, Chris, both accurate and to some extent amusing, because I've gotten a couple of emails from readers who say, I'm not comfortable with all this sex stuff in this book. I didn't realize when I picked it up it's going to be all this stuff about sex. And I didn't write the response, but there was one woman, because she wrote me what was essentially a very nice note, but just saying that she couldn't stand it. And she'd read all of my books, she said, and I was like, ma'am, you obviously have me confused with my friend John Grisham. And, this is not a theme that John likes to write about, but I do. You could not have read all of my books and be surprised by the sexuality in Suspect.
Well, I just want to add one more thing. You know more about writing, of course, than we do, but I do know the very best books are written without the author caring what anyone thinks. Just pouring yourself and your thoughts out and not imagining anyone around you. So we're grateful. We're grateful because it's authentic and much needed. We are very big believers on opening up hot button topics and talking about life issues, and that's one of the reasons we love this book. So thanks, Scott.
Well, thank you. But I do think, whether I'm right or wrong about it, that that sex and sexuality are enduring human preoccupations.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to talk about something that's equally sexy, and that is the legal system, or at least to me. One of your characters, Lucia, and her legal team, they put a high degree of trust in the legal system after she is accused of wrongdoing. And, they're navigating these potential charges. There's a lot to consider. One of the attorneys on the other side doesn't exactly play by the rules in terms of disclosing some information. And there's a social media fallout that's pretty significant.
Right.
And now the accused person did not then respond with social media. She allowed the legal process to play out. And I was wondering if you thought her trust was misplaced, because is the legal system even equipped to deal with how fast viral information can spread? Deep fakes. What do you think about that?
Well, in the space of the novel, I think the character's response becomes understandable by the end of the book. And long short, there's some things she does not want to say. The created reality of social media, though, and the way, we have to respond and be aware of this hall of mirrors that is social media, is totally befuddling to me. I know it's out there. I know it exists. And I hate always sounding like an old guy, but, it's just not it's not my experience. And I don't thumb my nose at social media, but I don't, every night I watch my wife before we get ready to go to bed, going through Facebook and responding to these posts. And we disagree about whether this is a worthwhile use of time. So she knows so much more about so many of our friends as a result of doing that. But I've just, I can't get into it. And yet, the comment and the question you're making, Kristen's completely right. This is really important to a huge number of people, probably a majority of the people in the country now. Certainly anybody young really cares about this stuff. And there's a great thing about information being democratized and people being able to choose their own sources and who they want to hear from. And that's all very neat. But, as a society, we really have not figured out how to cope with this. We can't agree on ground rules as to, what's even civil discourse on social media. And, of course, my perception as an outsider is that a lot of it is personal marketing, and that people are telling other people what they want to tell them about themselves, and it's essentially biased reportage. But again, the reality you're talking about, that something goes viral and totally alters the way other people think about you, and with almost no opportunity for rebuttal, is pretty amazing.
It is. As an attorney, I am sure you've thought about the court of public opinion
Sure.
versus the courtroom. And
Right.
that line is becoming, I think, increasingly blurred in some respects, because it does sway the way we think about, even as jurors, how to perceive a case. But the issues alone are changing as a result of these significant social media changes.
Right. As a trial lawyer, I was always aware of the newspapers, and if the case was big enough, TV. And over the years, I became sort of aware of the realities of how to deal with those subjects. But you're completely right that how do you deal with social media while you're on trial? I haven't even really thought about that. And I don't know what you do. And I also don't know how the rules of ethical behavior interact with that. You're not supposed to be generally talking to the press about the subject matter of a court proceeding. But there's all these other people gabbing about it. So how do you, and I'm sure that given the realities of trying cases, there are a lot of people who've got other parties out there trying to control the spin on social media.
Absolutely. See, I told you this was a sexy subject.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Well,
It's an interesting subject, I'll tell you. Yeah.
very interesting. I guess the difference is, in those days, when you had the newspaper or a television, you knew the entity. You had 1, 2, 3 entities that you were dealing with. In social media, there are millions, and there's millions of voices. Propaganda truly is just being spread everywhere. I think the biggest danger for us, maybe society, here I am, a juror, not the lawyer, I'm a juror here, just saying we have to be careful where we get our news source and what we believe to be true and false. And I could see where that would be very dangerous. Great point.
Or helpful.
Or maybe eye-opening. So you brought up something, you said it's a hall of mirrors, and that leads into my next question, because your character Pinky said something. There were so many quotes in this novel that I had written down and thought about for a good while. This one struck me in an unusual way. She said, do you realize you never see your own face? You can look in a mirror, but that's a mirror image. reversed. We can see the face of every single human being in the world except our own. We will never actually see ourselves directly or the way other people do. That's like kind of spiritual or deep, right? Well, I say, it sure is, Pinky. It sure is. And I'm the reader who has never thought of this. Pinky is saying this, but we all know that Scott Turow is putting those thoughts in Pinky's head. So I want to ask you, as the writer, where did you come up with this theory? What did you intend by this remark? And what did it mean for Pinky and Coob? We loved that little pair when they paired up. I don't want to give any more clues to that. And what about us in the real world? Are we pretending to be something different? Do we ever really see ourselves for who we are?
Well, and actually, weirdly, Chris, this comment interacts with Kristen's, because, I mean, my head is full of all kinds of weird little thoughts, like the reality that's been with me since I was a kid, that you never actually lay eyes on yourself in the way that other people see you, which is, straight on, not as a reversed image. And of course, there's clear metaphorical meaning to that. And I think we all know the truth of that nobody ever sees themselves the way other people see us. And yet, here's where it gets really strange. Nobody knows the parts of ourselves that we try so much to hide, the parts that we don't broadcast on social media. Nobody knows it better than we ourselves do. Maybe intimate partners are acquainted with part of that. But it is such a contrast between the social media person who wants to present, an image of herself or himself, versus the person who really doesn't see themselves, and yet has all of this weird stuff rattling around that they do know about themselves, and which, frankly, they sometimes often have a hard time integrating. I'm not sure any of us have a completely integrated picture of ourselves, no matter whether we share it or not. So lots of levels, but at the end of the day, when we talk about all of these different aspects of seeing and being seen, we do understand why there's literature, and why people want to reflect on these questions and try to get into somebody else's shoes or their skin. It's all great material for literary works.
Mm-hmm. And you do create such beautiful characters, I want to say, for the reader from the beginning of this book, that we are able to crawl into. And whether we want to be them or not, we feel what they feel. We may we may discover something about ourselves, or we may learn something new that we never knew before. And I just love that character. I love all the characters, but I love that character, Pinky. Thank you for her.
Thank you.
Yeah, along those lines, there's a theme emerging along the lines of sex, but is kind of new thinking. And I wanted to kind of dive into this a little deeper. Several of the characters in your book very confidently owned their sex choices and sexual behavior. And there is recently a new movement afoot that seeks to eliminate any shame and judgment associated with sex and replace it with freedom, within those consensual boundaries. And in fact, we recently saw a Manhattan congressional candidate who released his sex tape as part of his platform of sex positivity. And I was wondering if you had been thinking about this issue. And I was also wondering if you think it is a rejection of morality or maybe an attempt to redefine morality.
Well, Pinky, the little passage that Chris read before is sort of critical, because Pinky is always aware of how she doesn't get people and people don't get her, but she's very attuned to her body. And so, when she gets into the bedroom, she feels she can, in many ways, be a better partner and a better self than she is in other venues. And so she, accepts her sexuality. Um, it's a positive experience for her at almost all times. Sometimes more rewarding in some venues than in others, but something she, as she says, she almost always knows how to enjoy. And she sees this as part of her right as a human being. And there's a feminist overlay to that, for years, men have been telling women how to use their bodies, what they're free to do and what they're not free to do. And Pinky has no use for that. She's, in the current lingo, she's sex positive. She thinks it's good, not bad. And as long as she's not hurting anybody else or spreading diseases, she ought to be free to make whatever choices she makes. And, I have to say that I'm more in that camp than any other. And it's such a complex part of our being. I know that people decades ago worried about, well, you go out and you sleep with all these different people. How are you ever going to be able to form a bond with somebody else? And the short answer is people do. They lead a free and easy life, and then they get to a point where they really want to be connected to somebody else, and sex plays a huge part in that. So there is no other aspect of human behavior that has been less successfully governed by the rules that other people want to impose on it. And you can tell people who they ought to love and who they ought to be attracted to, but it doesn't work, does it? And that's it. It's an essential part of ourselves, and recognizing that and owning that, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I think you were tackling many themes that we see emerging very strongly in music and rap music, in literature, of course, and even in politics. So these are national discussions, global discussions, and what you contribute to those discussions, I thought was fantastic,
No,
tremendous.
thank you.
And I love that you said you can't tell anybody who to love. You can't. I have two kids who were teenagers, and I wish the old days of arranged marriages were here, but they're not. And if I say to them, here's who I think is good for you, I think they do the opposite. They just
Oh
want to
yeah.
rebel a little. So that's just it's a great whole theme inside this book too, that our heart doesn't always go with our mind. And I think part of this may even be DNA connection that we're not even aware of, some physical underlying connection.
Yeah.
But I loved that theme in this book as well.
Yeah.
So can you give us a little clue before we let you go? What are you working on now or next?
I have gone back, probably for the last time, to Rusty Savage, who was the hero of Presumed Innocent. And Rusty will be thrust into a role, despite the fact that he's been a prosecutor and a judge. He's been and a criminal defendant. He will now suddenly find himself forced to become a criminal defense lawyer. And so he'll be finding yet another aspect of the legal system.
That sounds like a lot of fun right there. You can make him do whatever you want, and we can't wait to see what he's going to do next. So I want to tell our listeners, you have got to pick up this book by Scott Turow, Suspect. You are going to treasure it from page one. You're going to be enveloped in a different world that's going to take you on a thrill ride. And in the meantime, you want to connect with Scott Turow. You can find him on his website, scottturow.com. He's also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And Scott, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure meeting you and diving down deep.
Thank you.
Chris and Kristen, thank you both. And I mean, this was really a thoughtful interview. Thank you both for the work it took.
Well, thank you for this beautiful book that gave us a lot to think about, and we appreciate your writing and keep it up.
Thank you. Thank you both. Great to see you.
Great to see you. Just love talking to Scott Turow, Kristen, and I know you did as well. And there's so many things that we could talk about with this book. I have other quotes that I wanted to bring up to him, but we just didn't have enough time to talk about it all. Is there something you had on your mind you wanted to bring up? I'm sure there is.
Okay, first of all, we can't give away any spoilers. There is so much else going on in this book that is current, in the headlines, things we need to be thinking about and taking apart and understanding what our response is going to be. But one of the things that really did strike me is this idea of sex positivity. And is this a challenge to the moral traditions of our country, of us as people, or is this a modification of morality? And I was wondering what you thought about that, because there's some really emerging themes that come out of this book that people are talking about in the headlines right now.
Yeah, I'm more like Scott. I believe in freedom. And I am with him. If you're not hurting someone or you're not hurting the public as a whole, I like the fact that we as a nation and a people today are more open to talking about these sexual issues and to accepting each other for who we are instead of judging. And this is one thing I loved about this book and that character Pinky. I want to say one more quote that Pinky said. She said this, and this hit me really strong too. She said, "I know they say people change for love, and I've seen it. One of my best friends, she fell in love. She changed her clothing, her lifestyle, her religion, all for love. She definitely seems happy. It's weird. She's living by new rules, which she probably never even heard of before. But they feel right to her. It's a way to express her true self, the person she's chosen to be." And this hit me hard that sometimes in life we grow up in a very strict family with traditions and rules, and it takes a lot of courage and a lot of heartfelt self-inflection to determine, is this what I believe as an adult? Or am I being forced into a mold? And so many people throughout our history that maybe we don't even know, grandparents, great-grandparents, they had the courage to break out of that mold and grow and learn in different ways. And I think that's the answer to the future, that we have to be somewhat open-minded. And I always come at everything from this. Just love everybody. Just love on everybody. And stop judging everybody. That's kind of my thing. That's just me, you asked.
Yeah, no, those are great thoughts. And, I think this book really provokes the reader to think about morality, but also the basis for that morality. For some people, it may be a faith basis for morality. For some people, it may be what society deems at the time acceptable or not acceptable. And for others, it's whatever they think is okay in their own heart. The problem is we have people who think things that are okay in their heart that are not okay. And guess what? They do end up harming other people or that person. And so one of the things I took away from this book was really thinking about how we think about our morality, what it's based on. And these are subjects that we don't often talk about, for example, in grade school or high school. I mean, I know we think this is something that a family should be instilling and talking about with the children as they grow up. But let's be real, that doesn't happen in most households. I mean, think back. Do you remember a lot of discussions about the basis for your morality? And I think at some point in everyone's life, there needs to be a time where they sit back, like you suggest, and take stock of what is it they believe and why. What is the basis for that belief? And how firm of a foundation is that basis?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we talked about this a little bit before too. It's always sort of intriguing and astounding to me that we are all born with an inherent sense of good and bad. We have an inherent sense of what is evil and what is not. We just do. It gets polluted by society. It gets polluted by mental illness. maybe even really hurtful, horrific experiences that children go through. Our own life hurts, and we get a skewed view of good and bad. But that basic knowledge of even knowing even the definition in the word good and bad, that we would even have this in our inherent structure of realizing this.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really deep thought, because when you think about how profound that is, does that mean that there is this objective form of morality that is just implanted in us? And if that's the case, we need to know more about that. What is the source? What's the foundation? There's a lot of concern nowadays because we have entire people groups who have maybe extreme views, and those extreme views seem to fall outside of what is feeling right to us. There's people who believe that it's appropriate to behead others who are innocent. Well, that's where you get back to, what is the foundation for morality? Is it what people believe at the time? Is it something inside of us? Is it something that, we believe individually? I love what you said.
Mm-hmm. We had tapped on so many things. There was something else that the character said that, I can relate to as I get older. I always say to people, I am this age, but I don't feel any different than I was Mark Carey's age, our sound engineer. I feel the same as I did back then, hopefully a little smarter and a little wiser. But the character says, sure, the calendar says I'm all grown up, but inside, I know I'm not done being an adolescent yet. I thought, oh, is that true? We still want to have fun. We still have these same basic needs and for love and companionship and friendship and purpose and belonging and all these things. But we're just a little older. Maybe sometimes I get a little more tired. This is true, in my older age. But it just hit me. When I used to look at my grandparents and think they were such different beings. Well, no. You're the exact same being that you were when you were 16. You just look a little different on the outside, hopefully a little smarter on the inside.
What age are you in your mind?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think I'm still in college because I still have this huge desire to learn and grow. I don't think I'll ever stop wanting to learn. I'd like to say that. I want to be 21 because 21-year-olds are allowed to do a lot of stuff, so I'm going to say 21.
Yeah, I feel like I'm about there in my mind as well. Like, I can't believe my on paper age, my, biological age versus what I am in my mind, because I'm with you. I want to do things, experience things. I want to play outside. I love making sandcastles. All the things that I enjoyed growing up, riding my bike, I love to do. Mm-hmm. I want to draw. I want to write.
Me too.
So that's a pretty interesting thought. And I guess sometimes we act our age that we are in our mind, and that's not a bad thing.
That's okay. I'm all for
Unless it's not responsibility-wise.
We want to do all these fun things like draw and paint, and also we want to talk to these brilliant best-selling authors, and we're living it now. We're thrilled to be doing it. And in that regard, let me tell you what's on our lineup. We have Jamie Ford, The Many Daughters of Afong Moy, Shelby Van Pelt, Remarkably Bright Creatures. We have Christina McMorris back with us for a second time with The Ways We Hide. Pam Jenoff, we are reading The Ark, codename Sapphire. Barbara Kingsolver, Demon Copperhead. And Lisa Unger, Secluded Cabin Sleep 6. And shout out to our incredibly talented sound engineer and producer, the very youthful Mr. Mark Carey.
Hope you guys enjoyed today's show, and we'll see you again next week.
Thank you, Mark. Here's an example of young on the outside and age-old wisdom on the inside. Mark Carey.
Oh, absolutely. In the meantime, listeners, you can stay on the radar with Bookstorm by visiting our website at bookstormpodcast.com. You can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, and on TikTok. We've got some great ones. And if you'd like to see us in person, or better yet, one of our fantastic authors like Scott Turow, you can find us on the video version of this podcast on YouTube. Just search for Bookstorm and podcast, and we should come right up. So until next time, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep into life-changing fiction.